Hello, friends, and welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies, a podcast that's listening to the songs of Disney movies past and present. I'm Josh Spiegel.
And I'm Scott Renshaw. Thanks for joining us on this comprehensive and encyclopedic compendium of all things Disney music. Now playing Dick Tracy.
Before we get into our discussion, thank you for listening. No matter how you're checking us out, we hope you like what you're hearing. And if you are, we'd appreciate it if you could rate and review Mousterpiece Melodies on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever app you're using to listen.
That's right. Let everyone know how much you love the show and tell your friends to do the same. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw and read my film criticism at cityweekly.net.
And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece and email me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share. All right, now that all the housekeeping is out of the way, let's start talking about the songs of Dick Tracy. And to do that, we are thrilled to welcome into the show a very special guest. He is a box office analyst and film journalist. You can find his work at The Outside Scoop and Puck News. Scott Mendelson, welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies. Thanks for being here.
It is. Thank you. Thank you, and you're welcome. And it's a pleasure to be here.
It is. Listen, we're all. I'm going to have fun challenges today because I was realizing before we recorded, it's like, oh, it's going to be like Scott co-host, Scott guest. This is for me, for the you talking you two to me fan that I am. It's like I get my own Scott and Scott moment here, right here. Two Scotts for the price of one.
Do it like you do it back in high school, where everyone's called by their last name.
I could do.
Statler, which one of us is Waldorf?
Waldorf, yeah, I don't know. Well, hey, now to be fair, I have a feeling that maybe I'm going to be the Statler and the Waldorf when we talk about, if not just the songs of Dick Tracy, the entire film. We're going to start out with that general kind of overall discussion of what our memories of Dick Tracy are, because this is again the 1990 film, directed, produced by, starring Warren Beatty, along with like 85,000 other actors and actresses. This is a big budget adaptation of the iconic 1930s era comic strip by Chester Gould about the well-known lawman Dick Tracy and how he's trying to fight crime in the big city, in this case in the form of Big Boy Caprice, played by Al Pacino. This was a movie with a budget of roughly $47 million, which to people today might sound pretty small, but back in the day, that was a big amount of money. And to be fair, it did make a lot overall worldwide, but this was the Walt Disney Company, I should note, because this was technically released by Touchstone Pictures. This was essentially meant to be Disney's big summer film. This was their version of Batman. Batman by Tim Burton had been released the summer previous in 1989, obviously had been a big hit, a throwback, some nostalgia, comic book inspired. And this movie has a big name cast. The villain played by a iconic actor of the 60s and 70s. Batman had Jack Nicholson. This movie has Al Pacino. This movie also has music. Kind of. It does and it doesn't, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But before we get into the music specifically, I know you are both older than I am, which means I assume, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that you both saw this movie in theaters in the summer of 1990. So, Scott Mendelson, start us off. Walk us through, what was your initial reaction to Dick Tracy? Was this, I know you're a big fan of Batman for many reasons, was this another movie that kind of hit for you at, I don't know exactly how old you would have been in 1990, but again, I know you're older than I am. Okay, 10 years old, so a little older than the kid, played here by Charlie Korsmo, but what was your initial reaction to Dick Tracy when you saw it in theaters, assuming you did?
I did. I saw it the Saturday evening of opening weekend, and I was looking forward to it just because, I was still old enough to pay attention to this stuff. I know it was being positioned as that summer's would-be Batman. They even had like a midnight screening back when that was not something that always happened. And you got T-shirts instead of a ticket when you showed up to that midnight screening. And we'll get into the commercial conversation later, I guess. But I loved this movie then, and honestly, I think I like it even more now because first of all, it's so weird to the extent that Batman, of course, kicked off the 90s era of comic book superhero movies or radio show adaptations in some cases. And honestly, I think in terms of the, post Batman, the three first ones out of the gate, well, I'm talking about Ninja Turtles, Dick Tracy, and I'm going to be annoying and say the CBS 2-hour pilot of The Flash were three of the best comic book superhero movies, at least in America, for a really long time. Because, and again, I love the Batman sequels, obviously, but I think part of it is, I know Rocketeer has its fans, and I like The Rocketeer. I think it's a good movie. But I think commercially it has the same problem as Dick Tracy and The Shadow and The Phantom, which I like The Phantom a lot too, which is that because the first Batman was so mired in 1930s pulp, gangsters and moles and Tommy guns, filmmaking, film noir, if you will, that became the way to rip off Batman. And it's like, no, kids didn't want, Prohibition era gangster melodramas. They liked Batman. And again, the only films that come out of that era soon after that had fortune and glory were Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which was sort of in its own way a dark, gritty revamp of a previously kid-friendly property that was sort of spun through the Batman machine. Ninja Turtles, which, again, present tense, real world, presently popular comic book story. That's a big one that, it took Hollywood a decade to figure out. And again, shares some similarities with Batman, but it's not really Batman. And The Mask, which basically was the Batman template, but cartoonish with a red-hot movie star at the center of it. That even if you didn't care about the comic, it was still, this cool Jim Carrey movie where he turns into a cartoon gremlin and makes chaos. But as far as Dick Tracy, obviously visually I think it's gorgeous. I love the whole only primary colors thing. I love the fact that, and this was obviously from a time when most big blockbusters were at least partially attempting to stand out from the crowd. And by that I mean you didn't necessarily want your big blustery action movie to look exactly like or feel exactly like everyone else's big blustery action movie, because then you wouldn't stand out. I'd argue the last decade has sort of seen a softening of that notion, which is one reason why we get nostalgic for even flawed tentpoles like the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels and the Matrix sequels and what have you, because at the very least they were saying, okay, but what else can we do? As opposed to, I would say, after the Avengers, where they were taking all of these properties and saying, how can we make this like the Avengers? To varying degrees of success. As an adult, what stands out to me about Dick Tracy now is that it's a very sad movie. It's basically about three adults, Breathless, Tracy, Caprice, who are miserable because they're very good at things that don't make them happy. And they don't see a way out of that life that they have found themselves in. Or in Tracy's case, it's like, how do I have my cake and eat it too? Because he doesn't want to be a loner with no family and doesn't want to lose the woman he loves, but he can't stop being a cop. And I think that sense of regret and mournfulness, and that's reflected in some of the music, especially my favorite song in the film, which is, How Do You Know?
What Can You Lose?
What Can You Lose, yeah.
I swear I listened to it last night.
That's okay.
And that's the piano melody between Mandy Patinkin and Madonna, where they're both singing about unrequited loves. They're just singing about different people. He's singing about her. She's singing about Tracy. And I think it's one of the early 90s pictures that just really stands out as, regardless of your feelings on comic book movies and superhero cinema and whatever, I think it's just a great movie. I love the Danny Elfman score. It's very Gershwin inspired, and it does, it's one of many Elfman scores that's like trying to remind you of Batman, but not too much. Because, when you hire Elfman to do your comic book movie, it's because he did Batman, and that's fine. And I love the cast. It's worth remembering that Pacino got the Oscar nomination that everybody thought Nicholson was going to get, for better or worse. And I think to the extent that, and this was before every movie was a tentpole, so it was nice to see an A+ comic book performance get recognition, because that wasn't just, everything, if that makes sense. I think Madonna's very good in this. I think she's a perfectly fine actress when she connects, when she and the material match up. Desperately Seeking Susan, A League of Her Own. Dick Tracy, Evita, obviously. And I think she, I like the fact that it's this PG-rated rock'em sock'em adventure story. Like there's not a drop of graphic violence in the entire picture, but it's a very violent movie in terms of people being killed on screen and that kind of, grim, dark, real world menace. Because it's also balanced out by this, it's a character drama. Again, it's about three people that are wrestling with the fact that they are terribly unhappy. And at least in two cases, they know if they stop doing what they're doing, they will die. And I find that very compelling.
Yeah.
Sure.
Then and now. And now I've been going hardcore navel-gazy about this film, so I'll let somebody else go.
So for my side, your assumption is incorrect. I did not see this in theaters.
Interesting.
In fact, the summer of 1990 was sort of an odd little thing for me. I had just dropped out of a graduate program and was unemployed for part of it. And I looked back at the list of the top 30 movies of the summer of 1990 and realized the only one of them I had actually seen in theater was Darkman. And that was not until late August of that. So I did not have the funds. I did not have the ability to go out to movies during that summer. It was sort of a fallow period. So the first time I saw it was by the time it had come out on home video. And by that point, well, first of all, I mean, it was going to be the visual part of it was going to be lost. Nobody had huge high definition televisions in 1991 at the time I was actually seeing this. And there had been already there was a little bit of a stink on it. If nothing else, there was sort of it had disappointed, and it was not what people wanted, in terms of a box office smash. So I think that colored my expectations, and I was like, yeah, and also I was not quite the musical theater person that I am now. So I was not like, oh, cool, I get to listen to Sondheim. That was not one of the things that was motivating me to see this. It was just let's go see I guess I'll finally catch up with the Batman ripoff. And so it's not something, and that is the only time I have ever seen it, before yesterday.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
So then, now that you've seen it again, much more freshly in your mind, what are your thoughts on the film as a whole, I suppose?
I think it is okay. The thing that stuck in my head was that this is the movie that Barton Fink was warned against a movie because it's kid, dame, both maybe, and it's the kid and the dame, and that's one of those things that it's hard for me to get past the fact that it feels busy in that way. And it's a busy movie, and it's a movie that it was hard for me to get past feeling how much of it felt like it was you. And the thing is, the template for the creation of it, I'm sure it could not possibly have been, well, here was Batman, let's do it all, because it had to have been in pre-production and already in progress before Batman was actually released in June of 1989. So that doesn't actually add up, but it's like Danny Elfman score, check, soundtrack songs, check, separate soundtrack album, check, and, bright colors, weird looking villain, check, all of these things. And yet it's still hard for me to get past the fact that it just feels that way. And it's not something that I engage with. And I don't like Warren Beatty. As an actor, I have never found Warren Beatty interesting. Not once.
Fair enough. Now, okay, so a few things before I dive into my own take. Now, Scott, co-host, you brought something up just now that I actually verified, and I'm sure if I hadn't, Scott, guest, would have confirmed, which is, while Disney's marketing campaign was very much, this is the new Batman, this is our Batman, to your point, it's not just that this film was greenlit before Batman was released. This movie began filming in February of 1989. So it absolutely, there are a lot of similarities, as you just noted, but it was less of a, hey, Batman was a huge hit, we need to do that. It was, hey, we can ride on the coattails of Batman because of what this movie is.
Sure.
So it is at the very least a happy accident that that's how things shook out here. Now I should note, I was 5 going on 6 when this movie came out in theaters. I was a little boy who wanted to be a big boy. I wasn't even old enough to be the kid, an orphan eating out of garbage cans, a to-be protege of Dick Tracy. So I did not see this movie in theaters because, again, I was too young to see this in theaters. I'm sure that I saw some amount of the ad campaign because this movie had a huge marketing campaign. If nothing else, I probably was vaguely aware at that time of who Madonna was just because she was, and if anybody listening out there only knows of Madonna in the last 15, 20 years, first of all, I should note my old friend and the other co-host I had on the old show, Gabe Buxco, for those who don't know, he is genuinely, unironically, one of the biggest Madonna fans I've ever met. So I'm sure he is going to be gnashing his teeth as he hears me talk about Madonna and wanting to dive in when he's listening to this. I don't know if people who may not have been around at that time would realize Madonna was one of the, I feel like if you're thinking, oh, she was like Taylor Swift level famous, I think she was more famous than Taylor Swift has been now. There's a lot of similarities. I feel like maybe the more apt comparison maybe is like Sabrina Carpenter, in that Madonna, as is the case in this movie, and certainly in this specific era of her fame, used her sexuality as a major part of her music, of her fame. This is a year before that Truth or Dare documentary, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Warren Beatty's part of, because they were dating at the time. Yeah. The two of them were dating at the time, which is gross because there's like a 20-year age difference between the two of them, but they were dating. You could almost argue that for a certain generation, she might have been more famous than Warren Beatty was. She was a massively famous musician at the time, certainly still is now, but in a different way now than she was. She's a legacy act now. She was the biggest name, and also because she was so controversial, fairly or not, I'm sure my parents would have been like, yeah, you're not seeing a movie with her in it at age 5. So I certainly would have caught up with this movie on VHS or perhaps on DVD, which happened in 2002. I've seen it. I clearly have seen it more times than my co-host, in that I've seen it more than twice. But I haven't seen it that many times. I don't disagree that this movie is very busy. I think the way that I can prove this film's busyness to our listeners, if you haven't seen it recently or at all, I'm going to just list some of the actors in this movie. A movie which, by the way, let me clarify before I list them. This is an hour and 45-minute movie. This is not an overly long film, which is to its credit. Warren Beatty, Al Pacino, Madonna, Glenn Headley, Charlie Korsmo, Charles Durning, Dick Van Dyke, Kathy Bates, Dustin Hoffman, Mandy Patinkin, Paul Sorvino, James Caan, Catherine O'Hara, and Estelle Parsons. The list could go on and on. It's a massive cast with what is arguably not meant to be an overly busy plot. Dick Tracy is a lawman. There is a cruel mobster who is trying to take over the city. Dick Tracy is balancing his old-fashioned sweetheart, Tess Trueheart, the orphan who he is adopting, who he sees as a kind of sort of protege, the femme fatale, Breathless Mahoney, who is trying to seduce him. Plot-wise, I don't know that there's too much going on, but it does feel that way just because of, this movie is a lot, I would say. And it's also evident in the music. There are 5 original songs written for this film by the late, great Stephen Sondheim, as already referenced. There is an album, which we're going to talk about here, called I'm Breathless. This is an album of Madonna's with music, quote, from and inspired by the film Dick Tracy, unquote. There's also the musical score by Danny Elfman, and if I may, I think the way I would describe the score to this movie is that Warren Beatty must have said, hey, Danny, what if the Batman score? End of sentence. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know I forget which of you said it's George Gershwin inspired. I'm not saying it's not. I was listening to it and I was thinking, this literally sounds like the Batman score. This does not feel like there's any daylight between either of these films, which is fine because the Batman score is great, but this is not Batman. So there's that. There's also an entirely different album of music, which we're frankly not going to get a chance to talk about here, even though it probably merits its own conversation. There is an album with 16 songs songs, I should note, inspired by primarily this film, featuring performers like Katie Lang, Brenda Lee, Jerry Lee Lewis, Ice-T. Kids, Ice-T was a musical performer before he was a car insurance pitchman and on Special Victims Unit. It's true. This movie has a lot going on. So it's a lot. And I should also note, I think the other proof of how busy this movie is, I mentioned there are 5 original songs in this film. Now, either of you can correct me. Am I right that only one of these songs plays out in full and it's during the end credits?
More or less. I mean, they're
partials. The other ones are partially in it, I should note, but none of them are in full.
There are several months.
Now,
yes.
Actually, play.
What Can You Lose?
Yes.
What Can You Lose is in its entirety.
And what's the one that plays Back in Business, which weirdly enough is like not on the album in the current form, but it plays when, spoilers I guess, Tracy is incapacitated and the criminals are running amok. And that's a pretty long montage, so I'm assuming that plays in full.
It kind of does. It kind of does, because there's a different version of Back in Business on I'm Breathless, which is not the version that plays in that montage you just mentioned. So
very confusing to me when I re-listened to this.
Yes, it's like the thing that I would say about this movie more than anything else. And I know there are people who are passionate fans of this film as much as Scott, our guest, and even more so than I know there are some people online. I think very recently on Blue Sky, I saw the New York Times op-ed columnist Jamel Bowie. He had been randomly watching this film and was talking about its distinctive visual quality, because whatever else is true, this movie looks amazing. This is a film that, to paraphrase Jurassic Park, spared no expense. Warren Beatty has Vittorio Storaro as the cinematographer, fresh off of films like Apocalypse Now. Richard Silbert is the production designer. He had worked with Coppola. He had worked with James L. Brooks a lot. Richard Marx is the editor. He's the guy who edited Terms of Endearment and Broadcast News, and I think he also edited Apocalypse Now. This is a movie that looks like they spent every last red cent, and it shows. It looks amazing. And by the way, just very quickly before, because the similarity of how this with other comic book movies, it's, Scott, co-host, mentioned Darkman, which also kind of fits there. I do just want to clarify, I don't know if my co-host left, Scott Mendelson, when you said that the Rocketeer has some fans. Scott, you are talking to 2 of the biggest fans of the Rocketeer. I am here to tell you. This movie...
Which is why I made a point to say,
okay,
I don't love it as much as you, but good movie.
I will tell you. So here's my hot take, and I'm sure my co-host will agree. This is so much better. The Rocketeer is so much better than Dick Tracy to me. It is so much better than Batman. I know that's
at this point that is not a hot take anymore.
I think it is if people. I think it is if people haven't seen the Rocketeer before, because they might just think it's a silly, goofy little movie, and those people, I would tell you got to watch the Rocketeer. It's pretty great, because I will tell you the thing about the Rocketeer very quickly. Unlike Dick Tracy, The Rocketeer is on Disney Plus. Dick Tracy is not. I have to assume because Warren Beatty and his weird rights issues. If you haven't seen, go to YouTube, Google the Warren Beatty TCM specials where he plays Dick Tracy again, including one from a couple years ago. These are, as weird as this movie is, those specials are immensely strange. They are incredibly weird. Scott, co-host Scott, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Sorry, go ahead.
Just that I was glad that Scott Mendelson mentioned the Flash TV series, because that was one of the reasons initially going into The Rocketeer I was so excited about it, because it was written by the Flash creators Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo. So that was I love that shout out, because the Flash 1990 TV series was terrific.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I've only seen the new one. I've only seen the new show, but I'll take your word for it.
The old show, I think the 2-part pilot still holds up with no nostalgia goggles required. The other episodes, they're enjoyable, but I think I went and rewatched the Trickster ones. This was, God, 9 years ago when the Flash was in its second season and Mark Hamill came back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much a dry run for his work as the Joker on Batman Animated Series. And those episodes did not age well as I'd hoped, not for any moral reasons, just because it was a weird attempt to blend 60s zaniness with modern day crime drama and or film noir of the 1990s, and it just didn't quite mesh. But whatever,
Fair.
It's fine. First of all, Darkman, Danny Elfman score. Another one that Batman-ish, but not really. And you're right. Obviously, there's a lot of Batman in the score, but, he has said more than once that, he was going, mixing that a bit with Gershwin, and beyond the main theme, there's a lot of stuff that's different from the, and again, this isn't a criticism or anything, but it's like, it does have its own identity, just like, yes, we can all hum the stereotypical Danny Elfman theme for, as a joke, and that's fine. That's part of Typecast as cast. But, I do think his best work does tend to find a life of its own.
Fair.
That being said, yes, Rocketeer. I like the Rocketeer a lot. I like the Phantom a lot. And commercially, again, it's one of those movies that, like, commercially, it was idiotic, but artistically, I'm glad they exist.
Yes. Now, and that's the thing. I think I at least could say that same kind of thing with this whole movie. I'm glad this movie exists, even though I may find that it's fairly or moderately flawed. Now, by the way, I also would like to say, I'm so glad that my co-host said something that I was going to mention if he didn't, or if anybody didn't. I thought it was I thought it was an unpopular opinion. I wrote it in my notes as much, where I said, I kind of can't stand Warren Beatty's blandness as a performer. This movie looks phenomenal. It is gorgeously designed. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just the two of us or something like that. I understand that Warren Beatty is one of the great kind of Hollywood stars of the era. I acknowledge that he is an uncompromising auteur in his own way as a filmmaker. And I should also note the one thing, a movie that probably falls into one of the bigger blind spots. I've never seen Reds, which is a me problem. That's not anybody else's problem. But, oh boy. I mean, and again, we talk about Batman. It's kind of interesting to consider that Batman is often thought of less for Michael Keaton's performance, and he's a very good Bruce Wayne and a good Batman, as much as it is for the much showier performances from people like Jack Nicholson. Warren Beatty, almost by design, is allowing himself to be overshadowed in this film, both when it comes to the music, which, unlike in the I'm Breathless album, I don't need to hear Warren Beatty sing in this film. I regret to inform our listeners, you do get to hear Warren Beatty sing on the album, which is as good as you would imagine it is.
Look,
but he's just, what's your hot take? You love him? It's not a hot take. Warren Beatty's famous.
No. First of all, Reds is freaking awesome, but if that
I've heard so, yes.
World, so be it. I get it. If Patrick Wilson had been allowed to make a theme song for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the DC films would still be alive.
Fair enough. So, and that's it. I just wanted to clarify. I agree with my co-host. I'm not a big fan of Warren Beatty as a performer. The good news is that there's so many other performances here that are so much more distinctive, for good or ill, that it's kind of easy to forget about him in a way. I should note, I know Al Pacino got the nomination, and I would agree with our guest that he probably was getting it because Nicholson did not get it for the Joker. But what I had kind of forgot is that this is kind of patient zero for Al Pacino performances that go extremely big. I'd almost forgotten. He is, it's funny, Scott, our guest, we talked about Mary Poppins in our last episode, and we talked about how Dick Van Dyke in that movie, unlike Dick Van Dyke in this movie, because he's in this movie, is going so big in Mary Poppins. And Al Pacino is going so goddamn big in this movie. It is so, and deliberately, over the top. And it's not just because of the makeup of all the different criminals, very distinctive Academy Award-winning makeup, deservedly so. But I mention it because we can begin to shift into our discussion of the songs. As I mentioned, there are 5 that are performed in one capacity or another within the film. The first one, at least in terms of how it crops up, is Sooner or Later, parentheses, I always get my man, close parentheses. Because the premise of how the songs crop up mostly in the film is that Breathless Mahoney, the Madonna character, is not just a femme fatale, she is the singer at the Club Ritz. She is, of course, gorgeous and talented, and you see her performing a number of songs, some of which we first see as kind of rehearsals, or in the case of Sooner or Later, we first see her partially performing it in front of the crowd, including Eddie Valentine. I'm sorry, lips manless. I wasn't referring to Paul Sorvino in The Rocketeer. I meant Paul Sorvino in this movie, where it's funny. This compliments, you hear Madonna singing this song. It's beautiful. It's alluring. It's seductive. And then you see Paul Sorvino sucking down oysters. It's so gross to watch, intentionally so. Now this is, as I noted before, this is an Academy Award winning song. This is the only Academy Award nomination that Stephen Sondheim ever received. It is also, of course, the only Oscar he won. And I think one of my big issues with the way the songs appear here, it kind of speaks to something I've already said, which is they are partially performed in many cases. The operative word being partially. And again, who am I to second guess Warren Beatty, one of the great Hollywood Lotharios of all time? But I don't know, if you're going to have Stephen Sondheim write 5 original songs, I would love to hear all 5 of those songs in full. We hear more of the end credits, as you both noticed. Noted, we do hear What Can You Lose, which is a duet between Madonna and Mandy Patinkin. I do just want to note, I think it's funny that 5.5 years before she starred as Evita, Madonna got to perform with the original Che on Broadway. That, of course, is Mandy Patinkin. I like most of these songs, but I wish that we actually heard them all in full. Sooner or Later shows up twice, because the first time we see a little bit of it, we hear more of it later. But I kind of wanted to hear more of that song, if not the others. What do the two of you think, though, overall, of Sooner or Later? I Always Get My Man.
I think it's fine. I think of the quote-unquote in-movie songs, it's certainly the one that's most intended to be a radio signal of its own accord, which is probably why it ends up winning the Oscar. There's a certain, well, I don't know if that's true. I don't want to speak out of turn, but that certainly gives it a certain advantage where you can play it and enjoy it outside the context of the Dick Tracy movie. And I think it's fine as sort of a character introduction beat. And at least in terms of its use in the film, you know, this romantic, seductive song being sung to her current boss, who isn't dead yet, spoilers, who is, you know, gross and disgusting, whatever. And, you know, not to get too whatever, but, you know, the reason she takes to Tracy the way she does is basically he's the first guy not to treat her like crap. And we can talk about the psychological notions behind that, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I think as sort of a contrast to who she is versus the kind of life she has to live, I think it works. As a song, I think it's fine. Is it anyone's favorite Madonna song? Probably not. But it doesn't detract from the movie in any particular way. And as far as getting to hear these songs, when I guess for me, and this is, you know, goes to the whole, maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, I do hear a lot of the majority, you know, these songs I hear most of when they play in the movie, whether it's more, What Can You Lose, Back in Business. You know, for me, I feel like I've heard, if not all of, then the majority of those respective songs. And he wrote 5 songs.
He did.
Most of which are in some way informed in the movie. So that it doesn't bother me so much that the film doesn't necessarily pause to do full on numbers. You know, either like a full on musical or something like the beginning of Temple of Doom, where they do a full blown musical number and then the movie starts.
Sure.
Well,
anyway.
I think what's interesting for me is, as I already established, I did not see this theatrically. The first time I heard this song was at the Academy Awards, was watching the Academy Awards in 1991. And then heard it again. And I'm fairly certain I have never heard this song again since then. And I could have sung it for you note for note.
Huh.
That is how indelible it was for me. I heard it 2 times, only once I guess technically twice in the movie. And I think it is a really remarkable tune in that respect. I think it is incredible. I mean, the structure of the song is very simple, and yet it builds in a way that I don't know why this happened. I mean, when this started going, it's like I knew as I sat down for this, I could have sung this song note for note, word for word, despite having heard it exactly twice. And that seems very odd. And it's, to me, it says something about the effectiveness of this song at being what it was.
I think the hot take here is that Stephen Sondheim was a talented writer.
If true.
No, I mean, it's, so I was, even then, I would have been too young. I would have been 6 when those Oscars, occurred. I believe Madonna, I was reading up on it. So Madonna had brought as her date, famously uncontroversial performer, Michael Jackson. She, I believe, was dressed up in like a Marilyn Monroe style gown for the evening, which also makes sense considering the role that she played in Dick Tracy. And again, it's a good, catchy song. I think the positive flip side to my earlier comment is because these songs are relatively good, I wish that I had gotten to hear them all in full. Because, for example, the next song that we hear partially in this film is the aforementioned More. And I suppose if there's any of the 5 songs in this movie that Al Pacino as Big Boy Caprice should be bouncing around and like kind of sort of dancing and speak singing with Breathless Mahoney and her dancers, I guess it ought to be More. But also, I mean, I think during that bit where he's like trying to get them to move in a certain way and like trying to mimic what they should be doing is like choreography, like dancing, it was like, oh my God, relax, Al. I know, again, one of the greatest actors of all time, but also it's like, chill the fuck out, please. It's a very big performance even there. I mean, put it this way, you really got to work hard to overshadow Madonna circa 1990, and Al Pacino's doing it in that scene. The song itself is pretty good. Again, if you stay through the end credits, you hear it in full, and I believe it's the exact same version that you hear in I'm Breathless, the album. And again, a good blend of clever songwriting, obviously, and the right performer. Because depending on your perception of Madonna as a singer and of Stephen Sondheim in terms of the work he did on Broadway, you might think that those are strange bedfellows, essentially, because I also put this in my notes. It was funny to think, Patti LuPone has done some Stephen Sondheim. She was in a revival of Sweeney Todd, and she also played Evita on stage, which I mentioned because she very famously was very unhappy that Madonna played Evita in that movie, which is not a Sondheim musical, but obviously a big musical, a feather in Patti LuPone's cap as a performer. It's just, Madonna may not seem like the obvious choice, but it fits very well, I would say.
Let's also be frank that Patti LuPone has made it clear over the years that she brooks no silliness of any kind.
I don't know what you're talking about. She seems like a super chill lady. I would encourage everybody to read that New Yorker profile. She comes off really great. I was going to say, by the way, the only thing I was going to say about Sooner or Later before we move on, I'm sure it's unintentional, but as I was watching that, even the initial performance, I was like, this is like the song, speaking of summertime movies from Touchstone Pictures, from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that Jessica sings in her introductory number, that torch song that is meant to be immensely seductive to anybody watching. And again, it's a little less goofy here because Madonna's not a cartoon version of a sex symbol. She is an actual sex symbol at the time. But a good song. I think because she's so talented, because it fits her well, I wish that it had gotten that, even initially, that fuller version. Maybe I just wish I hadn't seen Paul Sorvino sucking down that many oysters while he was watching. Even though I completely get why that's what he's doing in that scene. Like, I get it. Warren Beatty laid it on a little thick. Don't worry. I get it, Warren. We know what you're doing there. But anyway, so after Sooner or Later, we get More, which, again, partially plays in full at the end. What do the two of you think of that song?
We were talking about, getting to hear the songs. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. I think that plays during the film's action climax when they're invading the club to arrest everybody.
Yeah.
So again, to me, as a casual viewer, I felt that I got a healthy helping of that song in whatever, for what that's worth. I think it's very good. I think it's obviously a song that's meant to be played in montage, and it's very broad, but also it's a song that's not meant to be super memorable, because the two times that it plays in the movie, when we're supposed to be focusing on Pacino being an abusive jackass who hates himself, and that's where I think a lot of the quote unquote pathos of that performance first show up, where like he's already killed Lips Manless, he's taken over the mob, he's now trying to turn the club into his own, and yet he still is fully aware that he's a horrible, terrible human being. And if anything, that sort of explains his over-the-top nature, because the character is compensating, not just the actor. But maybe I'm giving him too much credit. And the other time when the song plays over, it's again during a big blustery action scene when, damsels are in distress, cops are, shooting it out with robbers, and, the big emotional crux of that moment is when Breathless tells Dick Tracy which direction to go, and he has to decide whether he trusts her or not. And it's a good song, but I think it's one that's not supposed to overpower what's happening on screen. So I think it's perfect in that sense.
Okay. First of all, I don't think Sondheim could write a song that isn't interesting if he tried. I don't think that, but I think that it's interesting to have that perspective, because to me, this is the most complex of the songs that he wrote, because in terms of this is not, verse chorus bridge. It is there's a lot going on, and we've already talked about the Gershwin references that in Elfman's score, but this is clearly something he's almost effectively name checking who could ask for anything more in the lyrics to this thing.
Yeah.
So he's playing around with a lot of stuff, and when you finally get a chance to hear it in its entirety, I was like, now we're talking, because it is interrupted, clearly in the introductory moment when it's in that rehearsal scene with Big Boy, but also then in the scene where it's constantly interrupted. That pissed me off too, because that's where it's like, oh, we're getting to hear this song finally in its entirety, and when you hear about 12 seconds of it, and then it would be like dun 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 dun, dun, and we're going into and it was a really frustrating editing bit, because it reminded me of, okay, here's where I'm going to really date myself. If anyone remembers Xanadu, and the sequence where they've got the alternating, Olivia Newton-John doing, tripling her own vocals as sort of the Andrews sisters, and then the Tubes doing their rockin' version of the same song. That's what it felt like. It's like, you're not going to sort of, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup make sense. It's just, they're banging against each other.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of Xanadu, Scott. I've never seen it, but I'm aware of it. But that's okay. Yeah, right. Yeah. I kind of feel like I do like the song, and I do think, again, the Gershwin references are very pronounced and specific here, as noted. I like the song. I don't think any of the songs again, going out on a limb here, I think the songs that Stephen Sondheim wrote here are good. I think I know. It speaks to the quality of those songs, and also just, again, it's Stephen Sondheim. Warren Beatty chose him instead of some random person for a reason. And the reason why I'm mentioning it also is, you either may or may not know this. I learned this as I was researching the film. In the early 90s, Stephen Sondheim had done kind of a bit of a review show of his past work called Putting It Together. And 4 of the 5 songs from this movie that he wrote are in both the original production and the revival. I partially note because I think it's really funny. I mentioned before, hey, Dick Van Dyke is in this movie. He doesn't sing anything, but he is here. Julie Andrews is in the original U.S. production of Putting It Together, which means she was on board singing, or at least partially performing, songs like Back in Business, which I think is just kind of funny that she's doing that, or, Live Alone. Well, she does not perform Live Alone and Like It, but that is another one of the songs that's in Putting It Together, and fittingly is the third of the 5 songs in Dick Tracy.
You've actually just said something which is forcing me to backtrack and recant. I have seen a production of putting it together, and therefore that was the third occasion in which I had heard Sooner or Later previously.
There you go. So good call. Live Alone and Like It is the third of the five. As I believe our guest mentioned earlier, a couple of the songs appear in montages. So Live Alone and Like It is one such song. It does appear specifically as a montage while the kid, because one of the plot lines here is that after Dick Tracy and Tess Trueheart find the kid, they want to, get him off his feet. They want to keep him out of the orphanage. There's a little bit of hemming and hawing of like, oh, is Dick Tracy going to do the obvious thing and adopt this kid as his son, which, spoiler alert, he does. And before that happens, there's this montage where he's getting kind of dressed up a la mini-me Dick Tracy. He's eating a lot of food, and it's a good song. It sounds very much of the era and performed by Mel Torme. Again, I wish that we'd gotten to hear the whole thing. I should also note it's not on I'm Breathless, because as much as I guess it would be fitting to have Mel Torme on that album, he's not there. It's a good song. It's one of the, again, there's a part of me that this is where I'm probably a little stuffy, a little highfalutin. You don't put Stephen Sondheim songs in montages. You put them in the whole movie. And I think that also speaks maybe to the broader point of, if a person thinks about the movie Dick Tracy, it is true that Sooner or Later, as mentioned, won an Academy Award, one of 3 Academy Awards. This film won. It was nominated for 7. But is the music, are the songs the first thing you think about? And I mention it because while it makes sense within the plot to have a stage performer performing songs on screen, it's kind of equivalent to, as mentioned before, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Is the first thing you think about in that movie the songs? I don't know that that's the case for me. Again, I like Live Alone and Like It. I wanted it to be more than what it was, although it's probably, notably, the only of the 5 songs that might make the least sense to be performed by Madonna in the film. It's an interesting one. What do the two of you think about Live Alone and Like It?
I don't disagree. I mean, again, if you wanted to, if you, as a viewer, consumer, whatever, you felt that it was unfortunate that you were being teased with these great songs but not getting to hear the whole thing, I totally get that. That being said, the album sold 7 million copies.
Sure.
And I think back then there was a bit more expectation of, if you liked the film, you'd buy a soundtrack. Whether it's, obviously more likely the Madonna one versus the Danny Elfman score or this Inspired By album. So I do think that's why I guess I'm a bit more forgiving of not getting to hear all the songs, is because, especially in 1990 in a less fractured ecosystem, watching Dick Tracy, I really like these songs. Maybe I want to hear the old songs. I'd go down to a record store, I pay $10 and $15 and I get the songs. And now I've got them forever. And, 7 million copies was, I think, a lot even back in 1990, especially for a soundtrack. So I do think, if we're worried about, consumers at large not being fully exposed to these Sondheim songs, a lot of them were, either when they, right after they saw the movie, or just because they bought the new Madonna album.
Sure.
For what that's worth.
I mean, I do think that Josh, you're asking sort of a question more or less, which is, why is this a musical? I mean, I think that's a valid question to ask of this thing, because it's an interesting thing to think about, taking this property. And was this an attempt to basically say, I want to make this as immersive as possible, feeling like it's from the era, so I'm going to have it filled with all of these songs that sound like they're from the era and so forth. But I don't know that they all work in context. I do think they are all very good songs. Mm-hmm. I think having Mel Torme sing this was the perfect choice for this particular. I mean, I've done over the years, as like entertaining my children, what I thought was sort of the typical 1920s crooner voice, which is sort of this kind of thing. You've got that sort of, and you've got that sort of vibe to it. And so even though I don't know that the sequence needs it, it could have just as easily been, Elfman incidental score music. It's a song that I still enjoy, and not as much as I like some of the other ones, but I think that the better question is, would I rather just, again, listen to interpretations or listen to the songs outside of the context of the movie? And this is something that has now recurred as we've gone over a lot of the Disney films, is does the song work on its own? Does it work specifically within the context of the scene? And I think virtually every one of these songs works as a song better than it works within the context of the film.
Unquestionably, yes, I would agree with that. And by the way, it's not music related, but I did write this down a couple of times. We lost Glenn Headley a few years ago. I'd forgotten how good she is in such a thankless role in this movie, because as the character name implies, Tess Trueheart is not very complex. There was one good dialogue exchange in that first time she meets the kid where he's like, I don't like dames. And she says, good, me neither. But I was like, yeah, I mostly think of Glenn Headley from Dirty Rotten Scoundrels or Mr. Holland's Opus, which are very different films. But it's fun to be reminded that she was a very talented actress, even if it's a nothing role.
It's unfortunate for me that I'm not going to go into detail just because it's a secondhand thing, but I had a college friend who had a very brief acting career and performed with her in Sergeant Bilko and had one of the most unpleasant anecdotes I can recall. And so it's kind of tainted my impressions of her over the years just because it sounded. So anyway, she shows up on screen and it's like, oh, yeah, Glenn Headley. Okay.
Well, that's a bummer.
Yeah, I know.
Ruining my childhood, why don't you?
I know.
And reminding us that Sergeant Bilko is a film.
Yes.
Which I saw in theaters.
I only saw it on VHS, but yeah. Anyway, so, okay. Whatever else is true, I like her in this movie. So, we've already talked a little bit about What Can You Lose? That's the next one. First of all, briefly performed initially just by Mandy Patinkin. He plays, by the way, a character named, as all the gangster names are very colorful. His name is 88 Keys because he plays the piano. Very clever. And, it's one of those songs where I just think, if you're going to give me Mandy Patinkin with his lovely, querulous, tremor-filled voice singing this, as our guest has noted, a very kind of a sad song, a sadder song than you might expect from this story. Yeah, that's about as good as you're going to get. And I think that in the same way that Madonna and Stephen Sondheim may seem, at least to me, like strange bedfellows, the two of them, Madonna and the previous Inigo Montoya, feel kind of like strange bedfellows, but they work really well together. It is a solid song, although I mentioned this phrase a couple times in my notes. Good song. Weird usage. It's used weird, but it's a good song. I mean, it's hard to beat. I mean, you both talked a little bit about it, but any other thoughts on this one before we proceed?
Horrors, I disagree. No, for me, I think because it's, first of all, it appears it's sort of the low point of the film for all of the characters. And forgive me, we're going to spoil the big plot twist of Dick Tracy, which is that the Blank, which is the mysterious character that facilitates Tracy's temporary downfall and Caprice's temporary victory, is actually breathless in some, for whatever reason. And so, she's gotten what she wants. Tracy's down. Caprice is up. And again, she's still miserable because whether because she really loves Dick Tracy or because, again, she's infatuated with him because he's the only guy that doesn't treat her like crap. And of course, she's singing this, unrecorded love song right next to another guy that's clearly in love with. That's established quite poignantly in the abusive training sequence where he basically gets beaten up by Big Boy for defending her / the other singers. And so I think at that point in the movie, it works. And as far as it is very unconventional how music is used in this picture, especially compared to quote unquote comic book superhero films. And that I think in one way is why this has aged as well as it has, just because, anything that makes any movie stand out from the crowd with give or take some exceptions is something that's going to make it age better than if it just now feels like more of this, if that makes sense. And as far as why was this a musical, kind of, sort of, and again, it's you're right, this was shot before Batman came out, but Batman in its own weird way kind of tried something similar partially it was a compromise because Warner Brothers wanted basically a Prince soundtrack with a Michael Jackson love theme and like Elfman just to fill in the blanks. And Burton, to his credit, said, no, that's whatever. And, so when you watch Batman, that's another one where like you hear several Prince songs either in full or a lot of. And even in passing, if you're barely paying attention, you get a general idea of what the Batman soundtrack is without the film being a full-on musical. In a way that, as someone that generally prefers conventional scores versus, a soundtrack made of pop hits of today, and again, that obviously worked for something like Top Gun, or, more obviously Dirty Dancing, that I like the fact that these songs in Batman, they're there without overpowering the more, the timeless film noir 1930s atmosphere of that picture, with the exception of two full-on song and dance numbers, which, because it's the Joker, it kind of makes sense. It makes sense for him to turn on a boombox and start singing Party Man while he destroys a museum. That is in character. And with this, it's sort of the same thing, where it's like, it makes sense when you have a character that is an on-stage singer and or a piano player that, we have occasionally cut to them singing, and their songs then form the backbone to the soundtrack, whether it's in montage or whether it's, transitional scenes. And I think for me, without, being too highfalutin, I think it's very effective in that sense. And, yes, this is my favorite song in the film.
And it's mine too.
I tend to like the sad songs. I mean, my favorite song in Grease is the one that, start naming characters from Grease. Not Danny, not Cindy.
Well, it's the one that Stockard Channing sings, "There Are Worse Things I Could Do."
Yes, exactly. When she thinks she's pregnant.
Yes.
And that is, I appreciate Grease more than I like it, but that's the one song that for me feels real. But whatever.
Right.
This is my favorite song too, and for some of the aforementioned reasons, because it's one that actually plays in its entirety and we get to hear it play out, but also because it is the Sondheimist's song of the Sondheim songs. It is the one that feels, and not just because we're getting, his George from Sunday in the Park with George, who gets to sing it, although having Mandy Patinkin sing a Sondheim song is definitely something that gives it a little extra boost.
Sure.
It just has it's the one that feels like it could just as easily have been in one of his musicals. And I think that's it just has that kind of melancholy, that Scott, you've already been referring to, that it just makes me sort of ache that, you can feel all of that, all of, Sondheim's best tragic love songs had that quality that could just make you go, oh, I weep for the human condition. And again, I could just as easily hear this outside of it than watching them sit there at the piano and sing it together. I don't need that, but it's just a gorgeous song. I love it.
And again, none of the songs here are bad. It is, again, it's one of those where it's like, yeah, Stephen Sondheim plus Mandy Patinkin. I don't even care what else there is. That's pretty much an easy layup. And as I would agree, it does feel like it's right out of one of his musicals, as opposed to eventually. Actually, it's funny. I'm going to verify. I think that this is the only song, weirdly enough, that is not in Putting It Together.
It's not.
Which is honestly kind of funny when you think about it, because I would agree that it makes sense. It would have made perfect sense in one of his shows. But anyway, so after that, the only other song, we've kind of mentioned it a little bit, the only other song within the film that Sondheim wrote is Back in Business. Now, I mentioned it earlier. There is a version of Back in Business on I'm Breathless. That is primarily performed just by Madonna with her backup singers. The version in the movie is performed by Janice Siegel, Cheryl Benteen, and Lorraine Feather. It's, it's as close as you're going to get like an Andrews Sisters style song. Very bouncy, very fast paced, playing over, it's funny, as What Can You Lose is meant to be all the characters' lowest point. Back in Business is when the mobsters are taking control of the city. Dick Tracy is incapacitated. He is, in the Huskow at that time. And it's a good song. That one maybe even as much as Live Alone and Like It is like, I would have loved to have seen Madonna and the other performers, a la How They Sing More, perform that song within the film, but it is sadly not meant to be. It's a good song. It's good, bouncy, fun, fast-paced. Opens the second act of putting it together, from what I can tell. Any thoughts on Back in Business for either of you?
I think it's a functional song more so than some of the other ones we talked about. It's there to, again, it's there to bridge a montage and sort of, it's there to tell story, and I know you talk about this all the time and correctly, we talk about musicals, like some songs are there to, I feel songs, and other ones are there to, I am giving you plot through this song. And this is, in its own way, meant to, be a musical accompaniment to story motion, plot. And I do like that, again, you have this high point for the bad guys anyway. Back in Business, they're running around, they're killing people, they're stealing stuff, and Tracy can't stop them, blah, blah, blah. And then the next song, of course, is, What Can You Lose, where, most of the characters are still miserable. They 3/4 of the, 2/3 of the triangle have quote unquote won, and they're still unhappy. And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this is by far the most disposable in its way. I mean, it's again, it's fun, and there's not a lot lyrically that's all that fascinating going on. I almost was distracted before it even started because all I could hear was, Mandy Patinkin's honking laugh as he's, celebrating with Big Boy the effectiveness of their plot at getting Tracy out of the way, and I'm just hearing this.
It's unpleasant. I would say certainly. And the one thing I want to note, this is more plot based. Since I've only seen the movie a few times, I had forgotten, as I'm sure my co-host had, because of how long it had been since he had seen it, that there's the running storyline of this mysterious figure. It's not the Phantom. It's not the Shadow. It's the Blank. It's this character with a voice modulator. And at the end of the movie, it turns out, who is the Blank? Why, it's Breathless Mahoney. And I don't know how much sense that makes, but whatever. But yeah, so there's a whole lot going on in this movie. As mentioned, this film won 3 Academy Awards. Best makeup, understandably. Best art direction, also understandably. And as mentioned, Best Original Song. Now, I always love to reiterate what the other nominees in Best Original Song were when we talk about a film that did win or at least got nominated. So the other nominees, a couple of heavy hitters and or very strange nominees. We have from Young Guns 2, Bon Jovi's Blaze of Glory, which is a perfectly serviceable 80s hair band song that I've heard too many times because my wife likes Bon Jovi. There's I'm Checking Out from Postcards from the Edge. Do either of you recall off the top of your head who wrote the music and lyrics to I'm Checking Out?
Not off the top of my head, because I did, now that we've been doing this long enough, I went and looked into this up, and I did literally a cartoon double take. It is Shel Silverstein.
Yes, it is. The hilarious writer and cartoonist Shel Silverstein wrote I'm Checking Out from Mike Nichols' Postcards from the Edge. He did not receive any other Academy Award nominations or awards themselves. The other 2 nominees from Home Alone, written by John Williams and Leslie Bricusse, Somewhere in My Memory. And from The Godfather Part 3, Promise Me You'll Remember, by Carmine Coppola and John Bettis. And ironically, I did not remember that there was a song in The Godfather Part 3. That's not just me being facetious. I genuinely did not realize that. I would say, honestly, it would have been cool if Shel Silverstein had won an Oscar, but I think of these 5 songs, that's the right winner.
It would have been less cool if Stephen Sondheim had never won an Oscar.
Yes.
Correct. I was going to say, I feel like the closest equivalent now is the fact that I think even today, Lin-Manuel Miranda still hanging out, waiting for his first Oscar. And I want to tell our listeners, we are in a few weeks going to talk about exactly why that's the case, because I alluded to it last time in our episode. There is a song that should have been nominated for an Oscar that wasn't in a movie we're going to talk about soon. But I feel like that's the closest equivalent in terms of crossing over from Broadway to film these days.
That's my least favorite song on that soundtrack, that I totally understand why, from point of view, they submitted different songs from that particular movie.
Scott, all I know is we don't talk about that song. But anyway, so before we wrap up, I did want to acknowledge, as mentioned before, there were a couple of different albums. There's I'm Breathless, which I know I listened to most of earlier today. I know our guest has listened to it as well. Mm-hmm. Some of the songs on that album are songs we've already talked about. Sooner or Later, Back in Business, What Can You Lose, More, they're all here. And more. There's also the most famous song on this album is the final song, which was obviously just inspired by this movie. And that song is, of course, Vogue, which I don't know that we really need to talk too much about Vogue because hot
take. You don't remember the scene when Big White performs Vogue?
I would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen Al Pacino in the music video directed by a young David Fincher. But sadly, we didn't get that. Now, I don't think we need to talk about Vogue aside from saying, hot take, it's a good song. I would say, though, having listened to this album earlier today, a couple of the songs here, in my opinion, are real bad. And one of those songs would be I'm Going Bananas, which not in the movie, thank God. It is a Latin-inspired kind of a salsa or samba style song. And the best part, quote unquote, is Madonna doing a voice. It's not just her. It's meant to be her doing her equivocation of a Latin or Hispanic singer. And no, thank you. It's not good. It's pretty bad. I would also, well, yeah, I was going to say,
yeah.
The next song is Cry Baby, which reminded me of another song Madonna sung that also has the word baby in the title, and that would be her absolutely hideous cover of Santa Baby. Because Cry Baby, similarly, has Madonna doing kind of a Cupid doll style, like Santa Baby, like that kind of like high-pitched baby doll voice, which is, I'm sure some people like it. I am not one of those people. And yeah, there's a couple of rough ones here. There's also a song that was extremely controversial, I read. It's called Hanky Panky. And although it's kind of sort of meant to remind you of 30s style songs, it also includes a line, quote, nothing like a good spanky.
Well, the whole point of the song is, you know, she wants men who will spank her.
Yes.
What's bothered me about the song, not Oh No Problematic Police, although I'm sure Hanky Panky, I'm Going Bananas, and Cry Baby would absolutely qualify as, you know, going to inspire think pieces. It just goes entirely against the character of Beth Mahoney, who doesn't want to be treated like that. You know, and the whole point is that she's drawn to Tracy, and for what it's worth, when she is the blank, she helps Tracy until Tracy explicitly rejects her, and then she starts, you know, plotting his downfall, and then feels very bad about it. And so, yeah, I mean, beside being a bad song, B, kind of, I don't want to say problematic, because whatever, we're adults here, but it feels very much out of tune with the character. So I'm, weirdly enough, that was the only other single other than Vogue from this album, which kind of shocks me. One thing I do want to mention is one song I kind of like that wasn't in the movie is Something to Remember, partially because it feels like a rough draft of her excellent I'll Remember song from With Honor, a movie that came out about 3 years afterwards. That's just a straight up drama. And it's weird because for somebody that, I guess maybe I'm wrong, but I don't tend to associate Madonna in the same way that I do like a Kenny Loggins in terms of the songs they cut for movies. But a lot of her best songs were for movies.
Live to Tell.
Live to Tell is awesome. This Used to Be My Playground is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I like I'll Remember. And, you know, I say this with all respect because she is a legend, but it takes a special kind of talent to drop an A-plus song for an Austin Powers sequel and then bomb the Bond song. You
know, well played.
Beautiful Stranger is awesome. Die Another Day, or whatever. The Die Another Day, yeah, is not.
I was going to say, if you were going to say the Die Another Day song is awesome, I would have been like,
no.
We need to do a well check on Scott right now, because that's very wrong.
But yeah, and I do think it's in the sense that, yes, Something to Remember feels like because when I first heard it, it's like, I've heard this song before. It's like, but it's not from Dick Tracy. Like, oh, wait, this is probably like a dress rehearsal for With Honor's song that I quite like. And then Now I'm Following You, which is kind of in the movie, if I recall. There's a montage.
Kind of. It is kind of in the movie, although Although mercifully, it's not the version we hear on the album, because while Madonna has a wonderful voice that is enjoyable to listen to, it's not just that Warren Beatty shows up in this song, because it could be like, oh, it's like dialogue or something like that. Oh no, Warren Beatty is singing in this song, which, by the way, it's not just the song, it's a 2-part song, which feels like a threat when you realize it, I would say.
So, if you are going to listen to this album for pleasure, listen to He's a Man, which is fine.
It's okay.
Sooner or Later is excellent.
Yes.
Skip Hanky Panky, skip I'm Going Bananas, skip Cry Baby. Something to Remember is solid. Back in Business is solid. More is good. What Can You Lose is good. And then skip to Vogue.
Yes. It's an all over the place album, I think, in that way. Now, again, I mean, we've talked. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
I have absolutely nothing to contribute, because not only did I not listen to it for this episode, I've never listened to any of this stuff previously, and I was never a Madonna person to begin with. I do think that this is sort of my very small cover corner version, which is one of the things that I think makes for an interesting song, or a song that has a lot of depth to it, is can there be a lot of variation in the ways it is interpreted? And there are a lot of covers of Sooner or Later in particular.
Mm-hmm. Really?
And a lot of them. And the two that I kind of picked out just because I think they're very different in their interpretations, one of them by American Idol alum Catherine McPhee, was kind of a thing for a moment there, and does a very low-key, torchy version of it that's I think is very effective. And then a version by our old friend Susan Egan, with this very big brass orchestra version of it that's just like a belted out kind of thing. And this is, to me, if a song can hold up under different kinds of interpretations, that's something that tells me it's kind of interesting too.
Can it hold up under the interpretation, according to Wikipedia, from the TV show American Horror Story Delicate, performed by Emma Roberts and Kim Kardashian? That's the real question.
I would not know that.
I'm going to find out as soon as this recording's over.
Well, Godspeed to you, Scott. I will not be doing that because as much as I punish myself sometimes for this show, as you said earlier, life is too short. But I mean, listen, this is a fascinating film. It is a fascinating set of songs, it's all very unique and distinctive. I don't know that it all works per se, but again, whatever else is true of Warren Beatty as a performer with those wonderful veneer-like teeth of his, I don't know why I'm making fun of him for that, but I can't help it. It's an interesting movie to discuss. It is a movie that I am glad exists, although I should note, and Scott, our guest, you probably know this. I don't know that I had remembered this. I may have mentioned it back on the old show because I believe I talked about Dick Tracy there. Are you both aware of the fact that this movie prompted Jeffrey Katzenberg to write the 28-page memo that inspired Cameron Crowe in Jerry Maguire? Because that's a true sentence.
Which always kind of confused me. I'm not confused me, but like at the time, it's like, again, obviously I like this movie, but even if I don't like this movie, it's absolutely a case of taking an IP and doing something creative and imaginative with it. Mm-hmm. It's not, chasing nostalgia, at least for the property per se. And, it's in a weird way. It's like, I always talk about the Lego movie lesson, where like, for me, the lesson of the Lego movie, in the Lego movie, it's basically about how if you're going to play with these established properties, you need to use that as a shield or a justification to color outside the lines. And I think what's been very frustrating is that I think to a certain extent, Disney did that relatively well in the 2010s. And now they just listen to the internet and don't do that anymore and wonder why their films aren't as popular.
There's a lot of, and it's, I know that when Jamel Bowie was talking about this on Blue Sky, talking about the Katzenberg thing, and the studio was disappointed with how this film performed at the box office, which is not the same as saying this was a flop. This movie made over $100 million domestically, which at the time was a pretty high bar to clear. Now it's pretty normal. Obviously, our guest knows that all the more than I do. But it was a successful film. It was just not that successful because Disney, they went just as Warren Beatty went all in, they went all in marketing it. And, unfortunately, here, we mentioned The Rocketeer before. I love The Rocketeer. I am also aware that The Rocketeer was not as successful at the box office because of the aforementioned Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because of Terminator 2, number of reasons. This movie did do well, got a few Oscar nominations, it got a few Oscars, but it's a one and done. Anything else the two of you wanted to share about this one before we wrap up?
Yes, briefly. He said,
go for it.
Laugh, because I'm never brief. Yes, Warren Beatty is probably the least. I don't want to say he's the least compelling because I think he's fine in the movie, but that was sort of the pattern post Batman, where you had these, the superhero characters were almost guaranteed to be outshined and out. The movie being stolen by the show-stopping, over-the-top villain. And even the next year, where Timothy Dalton's, Errol Flynn-ish Nazi is certainly stealing scenes away and stealing the girl temporarily from our poor, sad sack, gee whiz, straight-chinned hero in The Rocketeer. And again, that's not a bug, that's a feature. The Three Musketeers, Tim Curry is trying desperately to be the next Joker. And again, I like that film partially because of that. I'm not saying it's a masterpiece, but I really enjoy the Disney Three Musketeers as just, a solid picture. And obviously Alan Rickman, who at least, I don't say he invented it because Bond films exist, but he sort of pioneered the modern era of movie-stealing villains with Die Hard. And then he did it again with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, to the point where, and I'm sure you all know this, Kevin Costner demanded that scenes of Alan Rickman be deleted from the theatrical cut because he was testing higher than Kevin Costner.
I'm sorry. Are you saying Kevin Costner made weird and inexplicable demands? That seems impossible.
Huge if true.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, that's but it is worth noting that if the Rocketeer had done Dick Tracy business, it probably would have been considered a hit a year later, just because of expectations and what have you. And this was even then called basically the first $100 million disappointment, in that it was the first film to cross 100 million domestic and still be considered kind of it wasn't quite what we wanted.
Right.
And there was a narrative at the time that it was just art direction, the movie. Some people threw that same criticism at Batman the year prior, where it's just art direction and Jack Nicholson. And obviously I disagree with that. And frankly, I think it's an ongoing issue that when a film becomes successful and or popular, its success can often be boiled down to one of many elements. Like, for example, Avatar works very well in 2D. I can vouch for that. And yes, the 3D helped become a super smash, but it would have been a big hit even as just a movie. But anyway,
yeah.
But
at the very least, I was going to say, I think my perspective is it is very much worth watching. It was available on DVD and Blu-ray. It's worth checking out at your local library if you can get it. It's just a weird movie. It's a weird, distinctive film. Only the man who co-starred with Mumbles in Ishtar could have made this movie.
Oh my God!
It's that
connection.
It's one that I'm fine with having seen again, but I will listen to the songs again before I ever decide to sit down and watch the movie again. Not just because it's harder to find than others.
It is. That's fair. So I think, Scott, co-host, why don't you take us out?
So with that, it's time to turn down the volume on Mousterpiece Melodies. What's on the playlist for our next episode? From 1989, The Little Mermaid. And while you wait, make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. Scott, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know we mentioned your credits at the top of the show, but as a reminder, can you please let listeners know where to find your work?
Yes, I'm a semi-regular contributor to Puck News. I write, run, and maintain the Outside Scoop, currently at Substack. And for those curious, I do a weekly podcast with myself on, usually it's Lisa Lehman and Jeremy Fuster, the latter of the rap. Basically, it's me talking to other box office pundits, so it's not just me blabbering for an hour. And that is called the Box Office Podcast. Be found wherever podcasts are sold, or found. It's not paywalled, but yes, wherever podcasts are found. And one very minor thing, and then I'll shut up. Considering the amount of awful and or damaging to the industry as a whole reboots and revamps that we've gotten because a studio wanted to keep the rights to a given property. I kind of wish more studios would do the Dick Tracy route, where maybe in 2015, Fox should have just, I don't know, hired Jessica Alba to do a 30-minute conversation in character as Sue Storm with rights for another decade.
Well, we couldn't get there, sadly. I'm telling you, people, if you haven't, YouTube, Warren Beatty, TCM, Dick Tracy, there are two different specials, one with Leonard Maltin, one with Ben Mankiewicz. They are both immensely weird, and they are both immensely worth watching. Now, and I should also note, I have appeared on Scott's Box Office podcast. I believe we talked about the best Disney film of the year, Snow White. Everyone remembers Snow White, right?
No.
Wait, what did I talk to you about? What was it?
Elio.
Oh, yes, Elio. Wow, it's been a long year, Scott. I'm sorry that I forgot really about that. I liked Elio more than I liked Snow White. There's my hot take for today. But anyway.
Is that really a hot take at this point?
It isn't. I'm being...
hot take. I like Snow White more than Lilo and Stitch.
I haven't seen the Lilo and Stitch remake, so I can't tell you how hot that take is. But anyway, we'd love for all of you out there to listen along. Tell us what you think. Do you love the songs of Dick Tracy? Do you hate them? Do you not even realize before this episode that there are 5 Stephen Sondheim songs in that film? I could believe it. If you've got any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share, you can always reach me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com. Follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece. And also make sure to subscribe to Episodic Medium, the newsletter on Ghost, the platform where I am covering episodes of Elspeth and Matlock featuring the stenographer from Dick Tracy, Kathy Bates herself. Before she won an Oscar for Misery, she was in a room with Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty in this movie. Anyway, Scott, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me at my primary outlet, Salt Lake City Weekly, at cityweekly.net. You can also find me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw and on Letterboxd at Scott Renshaw. And I'm Scott Renshaw.
And I'm Josh Spiegel, and we'll see you all next time on Mousterpiece Melodies.